Chapter 12. Cuban Missile Crisis. The spectacle of thousands of ships. Men of sense often learn from their enemies. It is from their foes, not their friends, that cities learn the lesson of building high walls and ships of war. Aristophanes, ancient Greek comic playwright, 446 BC 386 BC. People all over the world who were old enough to know would remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was during the height of the Cold War in October of 1962 between the United States and its allies and the Soviet Union and its protectorates. The world was on the brink of World War III. With one miscalculation, either side could have triggered a nuclear holocaust that would have doomed nations and annihilated regions of the world by just the press of a button. The issue started when Cuba, which is just a few miles away from the southeastern tip of the United States, was taken over by rebel forces of Fidel Castro, toppling the longtime American protege, dictator Fulgencio Batista. To avoid an invasion by the United States, Castro sought and got the protection of the Communist Soviet Union. When President John F. Kennedy took over from Republican President Dwight D. Eisenhower, he authorized a failed and disastrous invasion using Cuban rebel forces at the Bay of Pigs. Still reeling from this embarrassment, he was told by the CIA and other intelligence agencies that the Soviets had been stockpiling missiles in Cuba, apparently aimed at the United States. Kennedy demanded the removal of these missiles within 72 hours. To drive home his point, he ordered a blockade of Cuba to prevent the Soviet ships from continuing their delivery of the missiles. Tony Pizarro, barely 13 years in the service, found himself in the midst of the crisis aboard the destroyer squadron, an eyewitness to the imminent military and geopolitical crisis unfolding before his eyes from a front-row seat in the World Theater. Everyone was recalled and all leaves were cancelled. Tony, who was aboard the USS Lawrence Commander Destroyer Division 182, remembered. For 24 hours, all ships were being loaded with weapons, food, and other operational supplies needed for extended deployments. The U.S. was poised to invade Cuba with all its military might that included its entire armed forces, the Army, Air Force, Navy, and the U.S. Marines. While our ship was anchored out at the U.S. Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, I walked on the main deck and looked at the 360-degree ocean. The U.S. was ready for war, he concluded. To date, I still could not comprehend the number of ships present. When I reached counting the 500 ships, I stopped. Everyone on ship was on alert and all in battle gear waiting for the command of invasion. I woke up the next morning and as I looked outside, I was so shocked to see many ships had headed out. I did not realize the U.S. Navy had that many ships. I swear I have never seen so many in my life. It must have been thousands, all of them waiting for the order from President Kennedy for America to invade the island of Cuba. Fortunately, President Kennedy and Soviet First Secretary Nikita Khrushchev came to terms and agreed that the missiles would be dismantled and sent back to the Soviet Union while America pledged not to invade Cuba. Thus, the calamity of another world war was averted. Tony by now was no longer a steward. He was happily married and had astutely positioned himself to rise up the ranks within the commissary merit system. Since he passed the exam to change his rate from steward to commissaryman in July 1963, Tony was promoted to commissaryman third-class petty officer, a promotion which ended his services in the lowly position of a steward. Tony was sent aboard the USS Lawrence, DDG-4, for duty. The ship was then again deployed to Europe and Tony got the chance to visit Rota, Spain and Bari, Italy. Baker. While deployed, Commissaryman First Class Petty Officer Donald Davis became his immediate supervisor. Tony was assigned as a baker for the ship and worked only at night. After working straight for 90 days, he refused to do more baking and was told to report to the commanding officer for non-performance of work. Tony told the commanding officer during a captain's mast, private meeting, that he had no day off for 3 months. After verifying from Petty Officer Davis if that was true, Tony's case was dismissed and he was awarded immediate 72 hours off. When he returned, Tony was reassigned immediately to be in charge of the storerooms and logistics stock storeroom operations. This assignment gave Tony a chance to experience and learn deeply about the supply support functions and operations. It motivated him to become the best amongst the best logisticians and excel further in life as opportunities were offered to him by learning vast logistic styles on different levels to include accounting and other supply functions responsibilities. In 1964, he was ordered to report to the Naval Training Center in Bainbridge, Maryland. It was the command where women in the Navy boot camp were being held. Bainbridge, Maryland was an isolated command away from city life. Tony continued his duty as watch captain at the general mess and learned a lot from his shipmates. There he met storekeeper second class Cipriano Salonga, who in later years would be promoted to Master Chief, selected for the Warrant Officer Program, and later on to the Limited Duty Officer Program. He retired as a lieutenant in the Supply Corps. All his 3 children graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy. His oldest son CDR, Clifford Salonga, USN, retired. Class of 1989, daughter Captain Colleen Salonga, USN, SC, retired. Class of 1993, and Lieutenant Commander Christine Salonga, who served for 10 years at the U.S. Navy and became a medical doctor, class of 1995. From Norfolk, Virginia, Tony relocated his family to Wilmington, Delaware. It was a bigger city where his wife could find a medical practice job. She applied and got accepted at the Wilmington General Hospital. It was where his son, Gerard Anthony Pizarro, was born on July 30, 1966. In September of 1966, while assisting a food service operation at the Naval Training Center in Bainbridge, Maryland, Tony received an order to report to the in-country Naval Support Facility in Da Nang, Republic of Vietnam. The American president then was Lyndon B. Johnson, and it was the beginning of the escalation of the Vietnam War. Tony was first ordered to attend training on survival, evasion, resistance, and escape (SERE) techniques at the U.S. Naval Amphibious Base in Little Creek, VA. Prior to leaving for Vietnam, they were all divided into companies and platoons to be deployed in the mountains to learn basic survival skills like what food one could find to eat, survival techniques, and how to resist. They spent 3 days experiencing being a prisoner of war in an enemy camp. Tony considered it a valuable lifetime experience. During a war game exercise, Tony was appointed as Green Element in charge of a platoon with 12 personnel. They were ordered to move quietly from point A to point B without being caught. Their order was well executed, but they still all got caught by the enemy, supposed to be the Viet Cong Army. They were then placed in a pit hole filled with water up to their nose for many hours. When the whole training company was captured, they were taken and corralled at a mock-up prisoner of war camp. They were told, in accordance with the Articles of the Geneva Convention, to give only their name, rank, and serial number when captured. From the beginning, each trainee was given a piece of candy to sustain them for 3 days, a match, and a knife. Part of the exercise was to hide from the enemy and try to survive with whatever edible food they could find in the mountains. Having been exposed to mountain life while growing up, Tony was able to use his past experiences to survive. They also experienced being interrogated by the enemy and taught how to react when caught and maintain a high level of tolerance during such a difficult situation. When the interrogation phase was completed, the camp commander delivered a congratulatory speech and announced that everyone passed the SERE training except one who was taken to the emergency hospital for unknown reason. A truck then arrived with a dry set of uniforms for them, followed by another full of food. They were then taken to the enlisted barracks to rest. When they returned to the base, they were required to attend 2 weeks of Vietnamese language course. They were also taught the customs and basic traditions of the people of South Vietnam. The flight from March Air Force Base in Riverside, California to Da Nang Air Base was beyond the long-haul capacity of their plane, which providentially forced it to refuel at Clark Air Base in the Philippines. While there, Tony requested for a few days' leave to visit his father and other relatives. He felt he was saying his final goodbye to them because he didn't know if he could survive based on reports that the Vietnam War casualties were increasing in numbers each day, which the U.S. countered with the highest escalation of bombing in North Vietnam. At Da Nang U.S. Air Base in the central part of South Vietnam, there were no passenger buses since the country was at war. One was at the mercy of American vehicles operating in the region. Tony reported to Camp Tien Cha, a naval support facility. He was given a briefing on the do's and don'ts and provided instructions on where he was billeted that night. The next day, he was told to report to the receiving unit. Due to a large number of personnel, about 500 a day, that are coming and leaving, and the conundrum of assembling them each morning to give everyone an assignment, the place was in total chaos, resulting in a warlike confusion. It took almost a full day for his name to be called, only to be told his unit at the Qua Viet region no longer existed. It was taken over a week before Tony arrived. Luckily, during muster of the troops the next day, a senior chief mess specialist named Sanchez recognized Tony from the lineup. He knew Tony from his previous job at the Naval Training Center in Bainbridge, Maryland. With his help, Tony was selected to work as a warehouse supervisor at Camp Tien Cha, Naval Support Facility, Da Nang, Vietnam. Tony Primary's function was to maintain a maximum subsistence level of food supplies of frozen, perishables and canned goods at all times. It was his responsibility to order, receive, stock, and distribute food supplies to all units at the Naval Support Facility in Da Nang and surrounding Corp area. Due to his excellent performance, Tony was promoted to first-class petty officer. A problem arose when combatant ships' requests for food supplies at the U.S. Naval Supply Depot, Subic Bay, Philippines were not being filled up fast enough by Naval Supply Depot. Because of Tony's expertise in logistic requisitions and his knowledge of the Filipino language, he was picked for the job of provisions loadmaster. He considered his job of loading provisions and food requirements aboard the ships in quick and short turnaround times an honor and rendering his last service in support of the Vietnam War. From the U.S. Naval Supply Depot in Subic Bay, Philippines in January 1968, Tony received orders to report back to the East Coast aboard the USS Amphion, AS-13, submarine tender homeport in Norfolk, Virginia, from 1968 to August 1969. Since his family was still in Wilmington, Delaware, he would work during the week and go home on weekends. On close observation, a Navy man's work seems easy. But Tony had to learn all he needed to know, the tricks of the trade, like meeting the right people, selling himself as the best guy for the commissaryman's job, and always seeking a challenging job in the Navy. With this mindset, he made a special trip to Washington, D.C. to find out for himself how people were being transferred and what criteria his supply assignment detailers were looking for. That visit to the Bureau of Naval Personnel was truly the best means for Tony to prepare himself for bigger and better career opportunities. While visiting with them, he requested to attend the Commissary C Advanced School at the U.S. Naval Training Center in San Diego. Tony's vision of success was to learn more about the second-level management of food service operation, food service stock control, accountability of stores, supply management, and above all, the preparation required to become a supply officer in the U.S. Navy. After his schooling at Sea School in September 1969, Tony was sent to an independent duty aboard the USS Blue, DD-733, homeport in Long Beach, California. After learning the ropes from the ground up, Tony was now poised for the next level of his career with a trip that had given him valuable in-depth knowledge about how the U.S. Navy works and how the Bureau of Naval Personnel operates. Not content to rest on his stellar qualifications, Tony also worked hard on polishing his public persona to match his credentials and ambition. He learned and perfected how to be a good speaker and excellent leader to prepare himself for bigger jobs. During his off hours, he took college courses to improve his English speaking skills and to learn all about U.S. history. He also took a speech class to improve his communication skills. He loved to conduct lectures, help out in store inventories and work as a warehouse supervisor/manager. Tony was getting ready for bigger things to happen.